The cage had rust in its hinges and blood in its memory. It sat behind the dry river saloon, shaded by nothing but the wide, watching sky. Folks circled it like buzzards, squinting through the bars at the beast within. Elias Boone sat on his haunches, thick arms draped over his knees, his hair a tangled bramble and eyes like storm-wet stone, silent, still, and too alive for their comfort. He killed 3 men with his bare hands, someone whispered. Ripped them like hogs. That's what the sheriff says, replied another, but I seen the scars on him. Looks more like he was hunted than hunted. Across the dusty main road, Clara Bell McKenna stood in her widow's black, hands folded tight around the fraying edges of her gloves. Her veil was up, her eyes were dry, and though her lips did not move, her heart pounded loud enough she swore the crows heard it. The cage was not the strangest thing in Ash Hollow. She was. Clara had buried her husband 5 winters back, beneath a cedar that never bloomed. Folks called him a hero, a man who died pulling others from the blaze that took the church. They didn't know about the bruises she'd hidden, the words that burned colder than whiskey. They didn't ask why she never cried at his funeral. She stepped forward, the town parting around her like she carried plague. Her boots clicked against the boards, rhythm sure and solemn. She stopped before the cage, close enough to smell the iron and sweat and shame. Elias Boone lifted his head, slow as a bear thawing from hibernation. His gaze didn't flinch. Neither did hers. I want him, she said. Sheriff Clive leaned back against a hitching post, a smirk tucked under his mustache. You want the mountain man. He ain't no mule, widow. He don't come with reins. I'll give you my wedding ring, Clara said, voice calm, sharp enough to skin a man. She pulled off the thin gold band, held it up in the sun. It's all I've got. The sheriff laughed. Hell, lady, you can have him. Beast'll probably kill you in your sleep anyhow. The keys rang out when he tossed them. Clara caught them without blinking. She stepped to the cage door, her hand steady even as her bones trembled. Elias didn't move. You want out? She asked, eyes steady. He stood, a tower of doubt and silence. He nodded once. The lock turned. The door groaned open like it hadn't in years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elias Boone stepped out barefoot onto the date, blinking at the sky like it offended him. He said nothing, just looked at Clara, then followed her like a shadow pulled by purpose. The ring glinted in Clive's palm, and he spat in the dust. She's gone mad, someone muttered. She'll be dead by dawn. Clara walked on without turning. Her hands were empty now, but her heart was not. Behind her, Elias Boone never once looked back. The first night, he slept in the barn. Clara left a wool blanket and half a loaf of cornbread by the door, but she never heard him move. The next morning, he was already splitting wood, shirtless in the early frost, arms like felled timber swinging clean through the logs. He never asked where anything was. He simply found it. The woodpile grew. The silence thickened. Clara watched from the porch, a tin cup clutched in both hands. The sun cast gold across his back, highlighting a map of scars, some old, some angry and red, some that told stories no one had the right to ask about. She didn't ask. She didn't speak to him at all until 3 days later, when she found the broken gate mended, hinges oiled, and a fresh horseshoe nailed to the barn post. You fix everything but yourself? She asked, not expecting an answer. He paused, hammer still in hand. Then he nodded, just once, and went back to work. Ash Hollow watched with narrowed eyes and sharpened tongues. The widow and the beast, they called them. Old May at the general store crossed herself when Clara walked in, muttering prayers too loud to be private. The children stayed. The men stopped tipping their hats. Even Pastor Greeley stopped offering his weekly condolences. But Clara had lived under worse judgment. When her husband was alive, she'd worn shame like perfume. At least now the bruises were gone. Elias never touched her, never even stepped on her porch without her asking. But he carved things, silent offerings left by her garden gate. A sparrow, wings outstretched. A doe, eyes wide. A horse's head, worn smooth from his thumb. She kept them all in a wooden bowl by the hearth, though she never told him. One evening, thunder rolled low across the hills, and the wind turned mean. Clara bolted the windows and stepped onto the porch to bring in the drying linens. Elias stood at the edge of the field, head tilted toward the sky, sleeves rolled, staring into the coming storm like it owed him something. "You best come in," she called. "Storm's not bluffing tonight." He turned, walked to the porch. As he stepped under the awning, rain started to fall, fat drops like cold fingers tapping at the sole. He stood there dripping, wild hair pressed flat to his face, the smell of wet pine clinging to his skin. "You're not afraid of thunder?" she asked. "No," he said. His voice was deep, unused. "It sounds like home." It was the first thing he'd said. That night, while the wind screamed against the shutters, Clara sat by the fire, turning the wooden sparrow in her hands. Outside, he slept beneath the rafters with nothing but the storm for company. By morning, the town was buzzing. Someone had robbed the church lockbox, and the sheriff's boots were already printing a muddy trail straight to her door. They came at dawn, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth, voices low but charged like storm air. Sheriff Clive led the way, thumb hooked in his belt, rifle slung but ready. Behind him trailed 5 men with tense jaws and twitchy fingers, ranch hands, shop boys, cowards with badges made of gossip. Clara opened her door before they knocked. She stood tall in her robe, face pale but unflinching, coffee steaming in her hand like it was just any morning. Elias stepped out from behind the barn, shirt tucked, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. He looked at the men, then at Clara, then waited. Clive spat into the dust. "Church boxes been robbed. Ain't but one stranger in town." He tilted his head at Elias. "And you think he ain't the type?" "No," Clara said flatly, voice calm as a blade. "Is not." "Funny. That ring of yours bought you a real fine monster," Clive muttered. "And now he's eating off your plate and pissing in your yard while the Lord's house gets emptied." "He hasn't left the property in a week," Clara said. "You know that. He's been fixing your town while you rot in it." Clive took a step closer. "Woman, I'm not here to argue with a widow who's been sweet on a killer. You got 5 seconds to hand him over." Elias moved then, not fast, not violent. He simply stepped forward and placed himself between Clara and the rifle. The morning light caught the scar on his temple, the one that looked like lightning frozen in skin. "I'll go," he said. Clara's breath caught. "You didn't take anything." Elias looked down at his hands. "Doesn't matter. Men like me don't get to stay. You don't owe them anything." "I owe you peace," he said, so quiet only she heard it. He turned to Clive, holding out his wrist like he'd rehearsed this ending. But Clara moved faster. She stepped between them, placing herself in front of Elias with both arms wide. "No," she said. "Not this time." The A stilled. The men hesitated. "You all speak of God and justice," she said, voice rising like wind before rain. "But you worship hate in your marrow. This man built my fence, fixed your roads, carved me birds with no name. He's done more healing in silence than most of you have with sermons and spit." Clive's face darkened. "You accusing?" "I'm done answering to men who build cages to feel tall," she snapped. Then, quieter, to Elias, "You're not going anywhere." Something changed in him then, not in his face, but behind it. His shoulders straightened, not in pride, but in relief. A breath released after years of holding. The men didn't move. Not forward, not back, caught between doubt and shame. The standoff cracked only when a voice from the back whispered, "Maybe he didn't do it." Clive's glare faltered, but Clara's didn't. She reached for Elias's hand. He took it, rough, warm, shaking slightly. And in that small defiance, the world tilted just enough to change.